Hi, I'm Carl Bates of BBC and Millwall iFollow. You're about to listen to Millwall No One Likes Us Talking's Eamonn Barkley, discussing with our guest his life from being brought up in Bermondsey to becoming a footballer and his eventful arrival at Millwall, where he met that man, Benny Fenton, his manager. This is the first of a three-part interview where we welcome a Millwall star from the 60s and 70s. It's no other than Dennis Burnett. Enjoy.
Not everybody likes them, but they don't care.
Hello everyone, welcome to the first of a three-part interview with Dennis Burnett. Bermondsey born and bred, Dennis started his career as a youth team player at West Ham United. I know, but he was one of many. Making his first team debut for them in 1965. That must have been a really interesting time, leading up to the World Cup in '66. And the players that played for West Ham at that period. Dennis played 66 games in all competitions for the Hammers, scoring 3 goals. In 1967, he moved across the river, close to his birthplace of Bermondsey, and signed for the Lions for £15,000. What a bargain. With us, he made over 250 appearances, taking over the captaincy whenever Harry Cripps was out. In October '73, he left for Hull City for £75,000. What a profit was made there then. He also played for St Louis Stars in the USA, Brighton and Hove Albion, and Shamrock Rovers across the Irish Sea. Dennis played in a period of Millwall's history considered to have been a golden era, when top-flight football nearly and almost came to the Den. Welcome, Dennis. It really is a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Eamonn. Very nice introduction. It's very nice to speak to you and obviously to reconnect with so many Millwall supporters, as I'm sure they're missing football. Yeah. So maybe a little glimpse of the old days and talking might keep them going. Yeah. Just we'll add one little thing to the list of teams that I played for. After I left the Albion, I went back to America for another year, St Louis Stars, and then a short spell at Shamrock Rovers with Johnny Giles, the manager. And then I got offered a player-manager job in Norway. So I went from across the Irish Sea to the North Sea and ended up in a town called Haugesund, which is between Stavanger and Bergen on the west coast. And player manager for 4 years of a team called Hove.
Wow, I never knew that.
No, that's interesting. So, but if we've got time, we'll deal with them later because that's quite a lot of the history from that.
We'll have a chat about the Norwegian experience, as I said. But what have you been doing in lockdown?
Well, actually, I've made use of my time because last 3 years since packing up the building industry, I had a couple of not very nice experiences. About 3-4 years ago, I got bit by a false black widow spider whilst working up near Horsham. Put me in hospital for 9 days. I had sepsis and missed work for about 3 months, got back to work, and then I decided to fall off of a ladder and damaged the shoulder. So I had surgery to repair the shoulder, and I was in a sling for 3 months, so obviously couldn't do anything and couldn't work physically. So a friend of mine who owns a private hire driving taxi business down here in Brighton, he offered me, he said, if you get your license and your things, your badges from the council and get your car and I'll give you all the work that you need. So, and that's what I've been doing for 3 years. Private hire taxi, I take business people to Heathrow and Southampton and wherever, and obviously holiday makers. But the last 2.5 months, I've declined a couple of jobs that have come in, and I'm just, hanging my boots up for the moment.
Well,
so nice. in that period of time, my wife said, you can't just sit at home all day long watching Neighbours and all them sort of shows. So I've been doing a project in the garden, building some decking and building some brick walls and just landscaping the garden. So I've been kept busy.
Well, it's good to know that she's putting some control into what's going on there and directing you effectively, because that's what all good wives do, isn't it? You can't knock them for that. Well, that would be nice.
No.
Going on to the football then.
Yeah.
So how did you come to join us from West Ham?
Well, it was a long story really. I mean, because I'm a Bermondsey boy, as you've said. I was born, a little bit of my background, I was born in Guy's Hospital, lived all of my young life in Alscott Road, off of Grange Road.
Yeah.
All my family lived in the same two roads, and they used to drink in the Grange pub or the Claremont. All them pubs, they were drinkers. And the docks down, and they were all dockers.
Yeah.
In fact, my granddad and my three uncles, which were his three sons, all were in charge of the cranes that were used right by Tower Bridge.
Right.
There was that were sort of a national history really of everything were there, and they were operated those 4 or 5 cranes between the family, and if they decided not to work, then everything stopped off unloading all the boats from Australia, because it was a frozen food they used to put in the cold storage plates there.
That's right, cold storage
all the butter and the meat that were coming in from New Zealand and Australia and everything. So they were really they ruled the roost, as it were. So I used to go to Bacon School, which was on the corner of Grange Road and Towbridge Road, by I think it's called the Troquet, if I remember rightly. We used to call it.
Yeah.
In the old days, the supporters remember that, I suppose.
I reckon.
And that was great. That was Bacon School. I can remember Dr. Ing was the headmaster. I think I used to get the cane about every 3rd or 4th day.
That was reasonable.
That was reasonable, yeah. So, and when school finished, we used to play. There was a little alleyway right next to the school. I think it was something Brown's alleyway or something it was called. So, soon as school finished, we'd put our coats down and we'd have a kick about there for about an hour and a half before I walked all the way home. So, and that was my upbringing. So, and I know that there's a lot of animosity between players and different coaches that have been from West Ham to Millwall and from Millwall to West Ham.
Yeah.
And they've been vilified, I think it was Steve Lomas, the manager that you had for a while, and obviously everybody else. But I can honestly say, hand on my heart, that I never, ever had one iota of any bad words about me ever playing for West Ham, and now I'm a Millwall boy. And as a player, anything. And I can only put it down to the fact that my history is that I'm a Bermondsey boy. I was brought up and born there. Yeah, I just think it was really a fact of like, well, I'm coming home, basically. That was, I've been on holiday at Upton Park for several years, and now I'm coming home. So, to happy days, as it were.
Stan Godwin, a colleague of mine, has done a lot of research into the relationship between Millwall and West Ham. And he says that the reality of that animosity never took hold till probably the beginning of the 80s, and maybe even later, if I remember him correctly. But anyway, you came, you didn't suffer anything like that, and let's find out how you actually continued your journey with West Ham and then eventually joined the Lions.
Well, but leaving my upbringing away from it now and resorting back to West Ham, I mean, I went to school. We moved from our house where we were living we moved from Bermondsey to Peckham.
Yeah.
Our house in Peckham was being pulled down, so we were rehoused on a new housing estate down at St Paul's Cray in Kent.
Yeah.
Which is near Albion, Sidcup Way.
Yeah.
And so I played football there for the school and had trials for Kent, but I never got in because when I was 13, 14, I was very small and I was a tricky midfield player.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I was tricky. I don't know. But, they used to kick me a lot. I know that. And because being small, you got kicked out of the game. But I was determined to be a footballer, and I wrote for a trial to Chelsea and West Ham. And in those days, they used to send you back a little postcard, and you'd have to fill the postcard in with your name, your address, who you played for, how old you were, your height, and your weight. Well, because I sent back, I was 5'1" and weighed about 6-7 stone. So Chelsea replied and said no, in their view, I was too small to ever make it as a footballer. West Ham wrote back and invited me for a trial. Obviously, whoever read the form didn't know what feet and inches were. So I went for a trial all the way, and by then I'd started work. I'd finished school on the Friday, started work on the Monday. My first job was up in Wilton Crescent, just off of Knightsbridge in London.
Yeah.
And I was a trainee contact lens manufacturer in a laboratory. So I used to travel up every morning on the 10 to 7 train from St Paul's Cray, or St Mary Cray Station as it was, up to Victoria, walk about 2 miles because there wasn't a bus, and did a day's work, and then travelled home. But of course, I went for this trial for West Ham, and so I'd already done a day's work, got on the train, travelled all the way out to Chigwell, which is where they had a training ground in those days, played the game, and must have done quite well. I struck up a bit of a partnership with another guy, and then 3 weeks later was invited for another trial, and the same guy was there again, and we were put on the same team, and we'd dribble a bit and I'd pass it to him and he'd dribble a bit more and pass it back to me. And they asked me to go play for the juniors. And the other guy, he didn't want to sign for the juniors because his name was Rodney Marsh, and he was offered a full-time apprenticeship with, I think it was Queen's Park Rangers then. Yeah. So Rodney Marsh didn't fancy West Ham. But I then played through the junior team every Saturday. I'd go training 2 nights a week at West Ham, straight from work, all the way on the underground from Baker Street all the way out to Upton Park.
Yeah.
I got 7 and 6pence expenses, just about paid for the train fare and a hot dog at Upton Park Station on the way home, and would arrive back home about 11:45 at night.
Goodness.
And up the next morning again for the 10 to 7 train to work. So I did that for 3 years as an amateur.
Wow.
And by then I'd progressed through the junior team up to the Colts, as it was called then, and then finally into the youth team. And in the youth team, I played right fullback, and Harry Redknapp was right wing. John Sissons, who scored the first goal in the West Ham Cup final, he was the left wing player. And I was the only amateur in the whole of the squad. All the others were either professionals or apprentice professionals. So they would train every day with the full West Ham team, and everything. I would only train 2 nights a week for an hour, running around the pitch at Upton Park.
Right.
And obviously, when I was picked to play in the games, I hardly knew them. I mean, I only saw them once a fortnight because we didn't have a league. That we only played cup games in the FA Youth Cup. But I must have done quite well. We got through to, we won the FA Youth Cup that year. We beat Liverpool in the final. Tommy Smith played for Liverpool.
Goodness.
Remembering the name. And we really had a good team. I think we won about 4 cups that year. Everything we entered, we won. And but still, Ron Greenwood was the manager. He never sort of made a fuss of me, never congratulated me. And we beat Southampton at Upton Park 9-0. Martin Chivers was playing for Southampton at the time, centre forward. And Ted Bates was the manager. Right. And apparently, history tells me that after the game, he approached Ron Greenwood and said that he wanted to sign me. Could he have permission? He'd seen on the programme that I was an amateur, the only amateur in 22 players out on the pitch. Yeah. And that he wanted to sign me full professional. And Ron Greenwood said, no, you can't. I'm going to invite him to do that tonight. So he came into the dressing room after the game and he said, I want to sign you professional. I'm going to offer you professional forms. So I said, oh, right, okay, Ron, Mr. Greenwood, thanks very much. Yeah, that's great. He said, no, he said, go home, he said, and talk to your parents about it, because I still lived at home, I was only sort of 18. He said, and let me know tomorrow. So I said, no, I don't want to do that, Mr. Greenwood. The answer is yes, I'll let you know now. He said, no, he said, I want you to discuss it with your parents and let me know. I said, you might change your mind overnight. I said, and tomorrow you might, Yeah. He said, no, I won't change my mind. You let me know tomorrow. So obviously I did. I wanted to sign professional. I was earning £14 a week making contact lenses. And I signed professional for West Ham for £12 a week. Yeah. So it wasn't a very, certainly didn't sign for money. But so that started me off at West Ham. I got through to the first team after couple of years. I broke through into the team. Had a bit of a good spell. Had some really good games. Played one game, Manchester United at Upton Park, and they had Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, Pat Crerand, all of them players, and we won 3-2, and I was man of the match. So I must have been doing something right. But we had a training session. Briefly, this is the story of how I come to leave West Ham. Round about the February time, the 3 England players were away on international duty, Bobby Moore, Hurst and Peters. Yeah. And the rest of us were doing a training session out at Chadwell Heath, and it was being run by the assistant coach or ex-goalkeeper, Ernie Gregory, who knew about much about coaching as I do about computers. So anyway, we was doing this running session, and all the first team were there, all the players that had played in the FA Cup final and the European Cup Winners' Cup, they'd all experienced players. And they were all moaning. Harry Redknapp was there. He could run, and I could run. I mean, running wasn't a problem for me. And they were all moaning, what are we doing? Don't we have any balls left at the ground now, to play with? Are we training for the Olympics this summer and packing up football? all them comments were coming out. So at the end of the training session, about 40 minutes of hard running, we were assembled at the bottom of the pitch. I can visualise it now, in a sort of a big arc, semicircle around Ernie Gregory. And he started off, come on, Eddie, what do you think of why are you all moaning? What's wrong with you? It's a lovely day. There's people in East Ham working in a factory, and, you're out here and training. And no. So then he asked Peter Braybrook and a couple of the others, and he went round, and they all said, no, nothing, no. So he got to me and said, come on, Dennis, what's the problem? Why are they all moaning and everything? I said, stupidly, I was always taught to tell them the truth, and say if you ask me a question, I'll give you an answer. If you don't want to know the answer, don't ask me a question. And I said to him, well, the problem is, Ernie, that's the first hard training session we've had for about 6 weeks, where we don't do any running. Everything was with a ball. And when you do it, it becomes hard. All of a sudden, you're asked to punish yourself through this running, and that's why everybody's moaning. I didn't swear, and I was quite constructive. Anyway, that was finished. We then carried on training. Next morning, we go into Upton Park, and someone come up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Greenwood wants to see you in his office." All right, okay. So up I go, knock on the door. You come in, walk in. He looks up, and he give me the biggest rollicking, "Mr. Greenwood, this is I've ever had. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are telling our coaches what to do in training? All this, He never asked me, well, what did you say and why did you say it and everything. He didn't give me a chance to talk. And I wish to this day, really, that I'd have stuck up for myself. I was about, I suppose, 22 years of old age then,
Yeah.
And I just silently accepted everything that he threw at me. And he was really, really nasty to me. He was red in the face and everything. And I come out of there, and that was it. I never played again in the first team. This was in the February. In the March, just the day before the transfer system was, you couldn't transfer to a team after the end of March and play in any more games for them that year. There was an end of season date. So I get called, and we were playing Manchester City at home, West Ham. I wasn't in the team, but you had to report and just let the people know that you were there. So I did that at sort of 2:00. Mr. Greenwood wants you. So up I go. He said, right. He said, I want you to, I've got an offer for you. So I said, oh, right, He said, yes. He said, I'm going to transfer you to, you're going to go in exchange to Charlton, and Billy Bonds is coming to West Ham, and you're going in with money, obviously, and you in exchange. Mm-hmm. And I was dumbstruck. That was, well, I'm not unhappy at West Ham. So he said, he said, you go home and talk it to over with your wife, and you've got to come back and let me know by 5:00. So this is 2:00. Yeah. And there's now 35,000 people all outside waiting to get in the ground. So I managed to get my car out and go back to Goodmayes, which is quite near Upton Park, about half an hour's drive. Spoke to the wife. She said, well, it's up to you. You do what you want to do, but we've just got this house and we just got married. I said, right, okay. So I went back, and 10 to 5, I went up. West Ham had got beaten 4-0 at home. Oops. So I knew Mr. Greenwood wasn't going to be happy. And so he said, what's your decision? I said, no, Ron, Mr. Greenwood. I said, I've decided I'm not going to go. And he went berserk again. Who do you think you are? You think you can stay at the same club for all your years? So he said, as a player, he said, you have to move around and you have to go from here to there and pick up your boots and travel and everything, So I said to him, well, the thing is, Ron, I said, I've just been left out of the side, and I think I want to stay here and fight to get my place back. He said, I shouldn't bother, son. He said, you'll never play in the first team again. And that was it. So I walked out the door. He ignored me for the rest of the season. I didn't play any more games for the first team. I come back training because I was still a West Ham player, you see. I was on a contract. Yeah. Come back training for the pre-season. Billy Bonds was there training. So, I had no animosity towards him. It wasn't his fault. He was a good player, great player for West Ham, and come about the third week of training, barely a week before the season was actually starting, he said to me that Benny Fenton wanted to have a word with you for a move to Millwall. So I'll suggest you go over and talk to him. So I drove over to Millwall, met Benny, and I signed there and then. Wow. So that was how I come to leave West Ham and join Millwall.
Goodness.
And £15,000. And I didn't negotiate any signing on fee. I didn't get anything. and I think I'd started with the same money as I was on at West Ham, which I think was £35 a week.
Yeah, amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah. What a story that is. I mean, it's incredible how the system run in those days. I mean, no agents, no one standing there in front of you, no PFA jumping in and saying, "Hey, what's going on?"
No,
yes, none of those luxuries that they have now.
No,
goodness.
Yeah, no. I mean, you just went there and the manager spoke to you, and if he sort of offered you that, you're in the team, and we've got a good club here and everything, and we've just signed Keith, because I didn't know Keith Weller from Spurs because they hadn't played many games in the first team.
No.
Keith, he wasn't a big name, or Derek. But obviously he said, well, we've just made some other signings, and we're on the up. And I just thought, well, I'm stepping down a division, and but I'm going to be a big fish in a smaller sea, sort of thing,
Yeah.
Because obviously with West Ham you've got the likes of Bobby and Jeff Martin every week, and you just really. It was a pleasure to train with them. I mean, you can imagine every day going out on the training pitch, and you might be teamed up with you and Bobby. Can you go over there and just do some this? And so you spend 2 hours with Bobby Moore. You don't think about it at the time, but when you look back on it, you think, well, what a privilege it was.
Yeah, it must have been. I mean, so there you are, back close to your birthplace. And you sign with that famous of managers, really, Benny Fenton. How was Benny Fenton?
Well, I'll tell you something. I think Benny Fenton was one of the most underrated managers that I've ever worked with, definitely, and who must have been around. You look back on the times. I liked him when I was there. I mean, I was there 8 years.
Yeah.
We had our bust-ups. We had our out-and-out rows on the train coming back from a game when we lost, and we felt we should have won, and he was criticising certain things, and I was sticking up for certain players and saying this and that, and we had an absolute almighty row. But come Monday morning, he'd find where you were in the dressing room or outside, and he'd be the first person to come up and put his arm around your shoulder and say, "Hello, boy, all right, mate, you had a good weekend, how's the wife, how's the kids, all right, good,
Yeah.
Right, come on in, let's get to work." And it was all forgotten.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think he was, obviously his record, I wrote some things down here, I mean, when I signed, obviously, it was £15,000. Just weeks previously, he bought Keith Weller for £15,000.
Yeah.
Derek Posse, £17,500, and Brian King for £6,000 from Chelmsford.
Mm.
Subsequently, those four players, he sold Keith for £100,000.
Yeah.
Posse for £100,000 to Palace. Kingy, £100,000 to Coventry.
Yeah.
And me, after I played sort of 7 years for them, and I was now 29, I think, by then.
Yeah.
£65,000 to Hull City.
Goodness.
So, if you think that if you converted that to present day costs and say, well, Keith Weller's £15,000 would be 15 million.
Yeah.
That, if you convert that to millions of pounds, which I don't think would be too much to expect,
No.
he bought those four players for 52.5 million.
Yeah.
And sold them for £365 million.
Yes, we could do with a bit of that now. But there you go.
I'm just going to say that, wouldn't you? Wouldn't the Millwall today like that sort of money?
Yeah.
And I haven't included Gordon Hill because I was there when he played. I don't know how much he come from Southall, didn't he?
He did. Southall was playing.
And I don't think he cost much money.
No.
And I don't know how much he was sold to Man United, but I would expect it to be quite considerable.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about Gordon later. But
yes.
Back to Benny, people talk about innovations in football and all these coaches that we've got that play this three at the back and all these attacking wing backs and all that. Benny introduced that into our club in 1967. You know, I started my first game at West Ham was left back because Harry was injured, and John Gilchrist was right back.
Yeah.
But I think Harry returned after about 3 or 4 games, and he then reverted to this sort of 5 at the back system, where we had 2 marking centre halves like Alan Dorney and Kitch.
Yeah.
And the 2 fullbacks went forward, were allowed to go up the field as much as possible. And I was like a sweeper that covered the whole of that back row.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one year Harry scored 13 goals from left back. You know, that's more than what a lot of strikers score now in the Premiership.
Yeah.
You know, and they're on £300,000 a week.
Yeah.
Harry scored 13 goals. John Gilchrist was a superb fullback. Yeah. And Benny used to say to me, we had this system where I was to be a sweeper behind everybody, and I was not to go over the halfway line. He used to say to me, treat that as though you're in a field. He said, and there's a big fence across the halfway line, and there's a gate in the middle. He said, but it's always locked. He said, you're not to go over it.
Mm.
He said, and your responsibility, he said, if there's any goal that Millwall score from build-up play, he said, like a ball that's played through from the back over the top or anything, he said, if they score, he said, it's your fault. He said, because you've got to be, he said, I'll expect you to be on the end of that ball, wherever it is. He said, if it's a corner or a free kick, that's different. He said, everybody marks man for man, and we've got men, and that's fine. He said, but every other build-up play, he said, you are the man that's going to be in charge, and if they score from it, you're the one that's going to be to blame, because you should be in that position to read where the ball's going to go. And
Dennis Burnett, the recovery man. But there you go. Yeah.
Well, almost. Yeah. That's a new one on me.
Yeah.
But and I think you know, he had some system. We worked very well at it, and we were very good defensively. And Benny is a man. He was a straight up, and I mean, you wouldn't want to argue him. I mean, he can handle himself, no doubt about that. But he was very honest. He was very come out with it what he felt. But he'd also, if he was a bit over the top with what he said, he'd be the first to apologise.
Yeah.
Which you know, and also, you know, he'd come. I remember him. He used to come in the treatment room, and he'd, "How you doing, boy? All right, son. How's it going? All right. When you're going to be fit for Saturday? No. All right. Okay. Right." But I've been at clubs now where the manager, I was injured at Brighton, and the manager, a certain Peter Taylor.
Oh, yes.
Was the Taylor Clough era. He ignored me for 6 weeks. He never spoke to me.
Good.
Just walked past me in the corridor. Didn't say once, how's your knee? How you doing?
Mm.
But that's another story. We'll save that for another day.
Yeah.
So I think that you know, and also another thing I thought about that is very rarely discussed, but. I mean, our training methods in those days, you know, we used to walk from the Millwall ground. We'd go there in the morning and get changed. And Harry and I would go in a little cafe just by the arches and have beans on toast before training. And then we'd walk from the football ground back through the arches all the way across to Deptford Park.
Yes.
And a couple of the players would have a net full of footballs. Somebody else would be carrying all the coloured bibs.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have football boots on. I mean, we never trained from one year to the next in football boots. We didn't know what they were until Saturday came. Because we used to train on that red grass stuff, you know, the ashes.
Right. I know it well.
Within Deptford Park, there used to be like a big fenced-in football pitch with 2 goals at the end.
Yeah.
And quite often we'd get over there. We're after about a 20-minute walk, and especially if it was in the summer, in the holidays, and all the kids would be on there playing.
Yeah.
So Benny would say to boys, just stay outside, just leave it to me. Well, Benny would go in there and he'd get all the kids around him and he'd offer them tickets to the game on Saturday. And we need the train boys, but I'll give you all tickets if you just come off of there for an hour and let us train and do out it and all that. Because he never ever give them tickets. I mean, that was just a ruse to get them off the pitch. But you think, like, these days, with the way the systems are and all the beautiful training grounds that they have. I mean, the one here at Brighton, it's unbelievable, the setup they've got. Yeah. And you've got all the different coaches and everything else. Yes. I mean, all we had was a load of old dirty balls, slippers, a Benny, and that with a whistle, and that was our training.
It's amazing how it's changed. It really is.
Yeah.
But you've still done ever so well, and as a team, you performed wonderfully for all over that period. You'd never put it. I can actually remember seeing you guys on the pitch at Deptford, and I used to think to myself, I wonder if this is the same at all other grounds. And the only other ground I could relate to was Dulwich Hamlet, and actually they didn't have a bad position there at Dulwich Hamlet. It's because they used to play train on a pitch behind them because of where they were located. But I thought this is just unreal. Yeah, amazing, really, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it is when you think of how it's progressed, training methods and systems. I mean, even like Brian King, I wrote a little bit about him. Kingy, the goalkeeper, he was like a nutcase. Yeah. He was bonkers, absolutely stoned. But I think all goalkeepers have to be bonkers. But he was incredibly brave. I mean, he would dive down at people's feet and anything, And I never ever see him have a goalkeeping training session. No. Nobody ever took him to one side and worked with him for 40 minutes on training, on catching, diving, and positioning. It just didn't happen. We might say, right, okay, go in the goal, Kingy. We're going to do some crosses, and we'd run down the field and we'd cross it, and he'd come out and catch it and all that. But none of this real specific training that they do now. And I think that given his natural talent and abilities, I mean, he was a big lad, 6'3", probably 6'4", very agile for a big man. He weren't carrying any weight. I think would easily be in the England squad if he was around today. Yeah. Because he was, and yet he was basically a second division player for most of his career.
Yeah, he did. But but he did pull a team together, old Benny.
I hope you enjoyed the chat between Dennis and Eamonn like I did. Part 2 will follow next Tuesday, when Dennis will talk about some of those that he played alongside at the Den and reflect on some high-profile games during his playing days. If you have someone you'd like us to interview, give us your reasons on an email addressed to nolutalkin@gmail.com. That's NOLUTALKIN without a G. nolutalkin@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we will play out with Wall of Sound.